Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show, Jay Baer. He helps business people fundamentally rethink their approach to marketing. In fact, he is the president of the social media and content marketing consultancy Convince and Convert, and he's literally spoken to hundreds and hundreds of companies, names like Caterpillar and Nike, which you've all probably heard of. In fact, he's been in Israel in the past, and now he's talking to us here in Israel. Jay, a real pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you've got this fascinating book, which I've really enjoyed, called Utility, which is a funny spelling. Could you tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, it's spelled utility, Y-O-utility, and the subtitle of the book is Why Smart Marketing is About Help, Not Hype. And look, marketing and business is harder than it's ever been, right? I mean, we've got all these technology advances, but that's made it more difficult, not easier, to reach your potential customers. And what I talk about in the book is that really the success is that friend of mind awareness is replacing top of mind awareness. Like our friends are useful. And our families, well, that's not entirely true. Some of our friends are deadbeats, but work with me. Most of our friends are useful. Most of our friends are useful, and your business can be useful in the same way. And I define utility as just this. It's marketing so useful that people would actually pay for it. It's marketing that's so good, that is so worthwhile, that people want to receive it. And that is a stark difference from what we've been doing for approximately 1,000 years, which is making marketing that people simply tolerate.
Okay, you're making me look old, because when I started in the business about 1,000 years ago, I was doing old-fashioned marketing. But, when I was reading your book, something sort of struck me about what people had said to me a few years back. My day job, Jay, is that I'm a financial advisor. I work with people. I help them do financial plans and investing. And I get to do the radio gig once a week where I talk to cool people like you. But a few years ago, I had this great gig. I was hired by some of the banks here to teach them how to do financial planning. So I was teaching their private bankers the whole financial planning process. And a lot of people said to me, what are you out there teaching this literally to your competition? Aren't they going to come and take over the business? And some reason I had this real confidence in what I was doing. And I kind of felt that when I was reading your book, that if you're just out there teaching, people realize that you're the real expert. Is that where this is all coming from?
One of the things I say in my presentations, because it's absolutely true, and it's pulled out of the book, perhaps not word for word, but certainly the spirit of the book, which is the better you teach, the more you'll sell. And that is true. And it's more true today than it has ever been true. I mean, the kind of work that you're doing teaching your alleged competition is exactly the path of success, because a rising tide lifts all boats. Eventually, you're going to make contacts with those people. You're going to develop your own skills as an educator. That all of that is eventually going to pay off. But the key word in that sentence is eventually. My friend Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a social media consultant in New York City, has a saying that's particularly appropriate, which is the problem with business today is that everybody wants to be a hunter and nobody wants to be a farmer. All the things that we are surrounded by in business today and as individuals conspire to make us think and act faster. But yet, ironically, and perhaps unexpectedly, most of our results, most of our successes actually accrue slowly. So one of the things that utility really is a playbook for how to be a successful farmer in modern business. You have to embrace the power of eventually. You have to trust that you are going to win eventually, even if it's not in the next 10 minutes.
The words you're saying are exactly the words that a world chess champion told me. Susan Polgar is a world chess champion, and she and I, in fact, conspired, shall we say. We collaborated writing a book about how the strategies of chess could be applied to investing. And literally, Jay, what you're saying is exactly what she told me about improving not only your overall chess game, but even in a specific match, just to try to go slowly. Don't try to be the guy who instantly gets checkmate. And she was, of course, quoting some of the greatest chess players, and the ones who seemed to be able to stay on top for the longest, and some of them literally for decades, including her, were the ones who were able to pace themselves and realize that eventually they're going to move up. And then they did. And I think that's a critical lesson, and obviously it comes from many walks of life. We're talking with Jay Baer, who is a marketing, well, I'd say a real marketing pioneer. He's taught many, many companies, including about 10% of the Fortune 500, how to change the way they're looking at marketing. Let's look at it from the other side, Jay. You've explained to us why, from a business standpoint, it's good to educate clients. But one of the things that I see is that clients are often out there trying to educate themselves. And I can only really speak to the financial planning world, but sometimes a little education is dangerous. And they really end up, they say, okay, now I understand, I'll take over. I read your book, Doug, so now I can manage my own money. And boy, does that sometimes go badly. How do you relate to that in terms of really helping people?
I think you have to recognize that that's human nature. And again, if you embrace the power of eventually, one of two things will happen. Either those people who think they can do it themselves will eventually come back to you because they realize it's not as easy as they thought, or they will continue to do it themselves. And at that point, it's probably not a client that you wanted to begin with. I'll give you an example from my brand new book, which is called Utility for Real Estate. It's all these same principles of useful marketing applied solely to the real estate industry. There's a guy in Tallahassee, Florida, in the States, who only represents sellers of homes. He doesn't represent buyers. He only represents sellers, and he only represents sellers in the $200,000 to $400,000 US dollars category. Very tight target.
Wow.
He's had a blog for 10 or 11 years. Very active blogger, good at education in general. But of all the things that he's ever done, perhaps the most effective piece of marketing he's created is a real utility. It's a 65-page free downloadable ebook that he wrote called How to Sell Your Home Yourself. Because in that category of 200,000 to 400,000, there's in many cases not a lot of upside equity in those properties. There's not a ton of money to be made. And so a lot of sellers in that price point say, you know what, maybe I should just sell this home myself without using a real estate agent because I could save the commission and keep all the money. So he gives them the tools to do that. He wrote and gave them a 65-page book of how to do it yourself. But what he told me, he said, Jay, here's the deal. People get to about 25 pages into that book and they realize, wow, this is way more work than I thought it was in practice. There's no way I can sell a house myself. And who's the first person they're going to call? Joe, because he's the one who gave them the book. It's his best lead source.
That's a great story. The fact is, I see a lot of that. And one of the things I found, I don't know if you remember, I don't know if they had this where you grew up. But in New York, where I grew up, there was a store called Sims, and their logo was, an educated consumer is our best customer. And the same question that people asked me about why I taught the banks was, why do I spend so much time teaching? And frankly, it's more interesting to me to be able to talk to clients when I don't have to start at the this is a stock and this is a bond, right? I'm happy if they've seen my videos or read a book so they know about it. And wasn't that your experience as well when you first started in
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, our premise is take everything we know and give it away one dose at a time. It's why I do daily 3-minute videos. Just the way you're doing it. It's like, look, let's take everything that we know and package it up and give it away. Now, does that mean that at some level, some people say, well, thanks, I don't need you now? Maybe, but again, those are probably not people you want to work with ultimately, because I've discovered in my long business career that if somebody's decision making goes like this, hey, I could work with Doug or Jay or any other person who's an expert, or I could do it myself. If they really think that that's an either or situation, then that's probably not a customer that you want, and it's probably not going to be a good customer relationship long term, because a list of ingredients doesn't make somebody a chef. It's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way to put it. And the fact is, even though you give 3-minute snippets, or a radio show might just be 20, 30 minutes a week, and a book might be hundreds of pages with all of the information, I think that when you talk to a guy, whether it's in marketing or finance or swimming pool installation, this is all he spends his time on. So when you really do need an expert, that's when you want to go to someone like that. So when you present your ideas to the big companies, because your ideas are a little bit radical, you're saying give it all away, give out all your secrets. How do you find they receive this concept?
It's really interesting. What we find is that practitioners of marketing love it because they realize how hard yesterday's marketing tactics really are now, right? It's so hard to focus on hype. It's just very, very difficult and very expensive for a lot of reasons that we talk about in the book. And so people who are in marketing for a living or are fairly close to the customer typically really embrace these principles because they understand that it's a way forward. Where it gets tricky is at senior management level, because what utility requires, what this concept of focusing on help, not hype, and being an educator, what it really requires is not just a marketing program, but a cultural shift to say, yes, we're okay with giving away what we know when we have never done that before. And that corporate culture shift can be really difficult for big companies to make. And so I spend a lot of my time advising big companies on how to do utility type programs a little bit at a time. How do you create a pilot program? How do you create something small that flies under the radar that you can then prove that it works inside your organization and then expand it?
I think that's the model to take when trying to bring people over to a new concept. Jay, we're nearly out of time, but just tell us, your company, Convince and Convert, tell us what that's about.
So it's a virtual consultancy. We've got team members located all across the United States, and we work with medium-sized and large organizations to help them understand how to do marketing better in this digital age. And so we do a lot of social media, strategic planning, content marketing, strategic planning, utility programs, of course. And then we have a very popular blog, multiple podcasts, a daily email newsletter, books and seminars, and lots of content and education that we produce as well. And you can find all of that at convinceandconvert.com.
Okay. Are there any other emails or websites or Twitter or Facebook accounts people should follow you on?
A couple of things that you might be interested in. I just launched 2 weeks ago a brand new site called marketingpodcasts.com. So if you like this program and you like marketing, you like business, and you listen to podcasts and you appreciate audio learning, it is the first ever search engine for marketing podcasts. You can go there and say, I'm interested in advertising or small business or entrepreneurship, and it will recommend to you a bunch of different podcasts that you can discover and download.
Okay, and I have to give a plug for that, because before we were talking, I was looking at that, and I can't say if I like it or not, because it was so easy to use. The problem was I said, I better follow that podcast, and then I loaded it up to my iPhone, and then that one I better follow. So now I have like hours and hours to listen to, but luckily I'll be going on a plane sometime soon.
There you go.
All right, Jay, that's great. We really appreciate being able to follow you. We will put links to all of those sites at the show notes of today's Goldstein on Gelt episode. Once again, I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time, and hope we'll have you back again soon.
Would love to. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with international investment expert Doug Goldstein. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, go to www.goldsteinongelt.com or write to Doug directly at doug@profile-financial.com.